Hey guys, tonight we're taking a little journey, one that starts with the sound of gravel crunching underfoot, a warm breeze carrying the scent of dry summer grass, and a train station so small you might walk past it without noticing. You might not have experienced this before, an entire adventure sparked by a ticket I found tucked inside a book I hadn't read in years. This is one of those memories that feels soft around the edges, like it happened in a dream, or like it was borrowed from someone else's life and left in my mind like a forgotten souvenir. Still, I remember it clearly. My name's Eli, and when I was 11, I lived in a slow, sun-baked town, surrounded by wheat fields hills that rolled like sleepy dogs, and a single train line that didn't really go anywhere. Or so we thought. All right, now let's get into today's diary entry. It was the summer school let out early. Everyone was down with something called chalk flu that year, some strange allergy to the classroom dust. I wasn't sick, but I wasn't about to argue with weeks of free time. So I roamed. I'd wander for hours with a pocket of boiled sweets, a dented flask of barley tea, and a book I never quite finished. One morning I opened that book, Dust and Bone, the Locomotive Poems, and something slipped out. A train ticket. It was paper crisp and unusually thick, a pale green rectangle with neat black type, and a red stamp that read, "Admit one platform, none." I had no idea where it came from. It wasn't from our local railway, our station barely functioned, and the clerk inside only sold basic routes that ended 2 stops away in either direction. Still, I walked the mile out to the station that afternoon, mostly out of boredom. The sun had gone soft behind some lazy clouds and the fields buzzed with sleepy insects. The old platform was empty as usual. Paint peeling from the bench, a rusted tin sign clinging to a post like it had given up trying to fall. It simply said, "Fennel Crossing." That was the name of the station, though there was no fennel and no real crossing. I used to ask my dad about it, but he'd just shrug and say, "Some things are named after things that never existed." The station house was locked. There were no birds, just the faint hum of wires and a low whine from the distance. Then I heard it, a whistle. Not the short burst of a modern diesel horn, but the long, sad call of an old train, like something out of a storybook. And there it was. It pulled up without fanfare, black as ink trailing steam that didn't hiss or billow, it just drifted. The engine's face had a burnished brass badge, unreadable through the grime. It looked ancient, like it had been asleep for 50 years. The doors opened with a sigh, and that's when I hesitated. There was no one on the platform. I had no schedule, no plans, no idea what kind of train this was. But I had that strange ticket in my hand and a humming curiosity deep in my chest. So I stepped closer. As soon as my foot touched the platform's edge, I saw him, the conductor. He was tall, or maybe he only seemed that way because of the stiff hat he wore. His uniform was neat but faded, the brass buttons dulled with age. He carried a whistle in one hand and a pocket watch in the other. He didn't smile, not exactly, but his expression was polite. The kind of look people wear when they know something you don't. I held out my paper ticket. He looked at it for a long while, flipping it once, then again, as though checking for a code only he could see. Then he nodded once and said very quietly, "You're a little early. But no matter. This train always runs on time. That isn't time." That sentence didn't make sense. But I didn't want to sound silly, so I just nodded back. He turned and motioned toward the open carriage. "Car 3, window seat. Don't eat anything that blinks." Now, I really thought he was joking, but he was already walking away, shoes clicking like typewriter keys. I stepped up into the train. It smelled like cedar and dust and something faintly like oranges. The floor creaked under me, not loud, but enough to make me cautious. The walls were lined with varnished wood and the windows had little green velvet curtains. Each seat had a brass lamp with a pale yellow bulb, already glowing, even though the daylight still filtered in from outside. No other kids, just a handful of people seated here and there. A woman reading a book upside down. A man writing furiously in a notebook with no pages. A boy in a sailor's uniform blowing bubbles into a teacup. No one spoke. I made my way to car 3 and found my window seat. The cushion sighed as I sat. Outside, the town looked smaller already, like it had been drawn by a child with a shaky hand. The wheat fields shimmered like a golden sea. The whistle blew again, softer this time, like someone calling from a dream. The train began to move slow at first, then smoother, faster. But there was no jolt, just the sensation of the world shifting around me. I held the ticket in my hand the whole time, not wanting to lose it. It didn't feel like paper anymore, more like something warmer, like it remembered being touched. And just as we pulled away from Fennel Crossing, I noticed something strange. The station sign was gone. There was no one on the platform, and no tracks behind us, only open field. The train hummed softly beneath me, not so much clattering on rails as gliding like it was moving across water or air. I pressed my forehead gently against the window, trying to glimpse the path we'd taken, but there was nothing behind us now. No tracks, no station, just wheat fields stretching away like time had unspooled them. The light inside the train was golden, like it was always 5 in the afternoon. I glanced around the carriage. Car 3 had more passengers than I first noticed, but none of them made any noise. They sat like bookends, evenly spaced and staring, some out the window, some into their laps. And one elderly man who seemed to be sleeping, though his eyes were open. That was when the conductor came back. He moved down the aisle without a sound, like his feet barely touched the floor. His coat trailed behind him ever so slightly, just enough to make it seem like the air was lighter around him. When he reached my seat, he didn't speak at first. He just took out his brass puncher, a lovely old thing with swirly engravings, and clicked it once through the ticket I still held. A tiny red curl of paper floated to the ground. "Mind the turns," he said. I blinked. The turns? He smiled at that. Or maybe he didn't. It was the kind of expression you imagine after it's already passed. "The ones you remember," he said, and then moved on. Before I could think about what that meant, he paused at the next row and tilted his head toward a woman holding an umbrella that was dripping, though it wasn't raining. Then he disappeared into the next car. A minute later, I noticed something odd. The whistle blew again, but not from outside. It came from inside the carriage. A short, sharp note, like someone reminding you to look up. Everyone looked toward the door. The conductor wasn't the one who stepped through. It was a boy about my age, maybe a bit older. His jacket was far too big for him, and his hands were stuffed in the pockets, like he was hiding something. He had a wild tuft of hair that refused to be flattened, and a silver pin shaped like a cloud fastened crookedly to his collar. He scanned the carriage and muttered, "Right, car 3. Then he turned around and left again, slipping through the door as if he'd just forgotten why he'd come. I tried not to stare, but when I turned back to my window, I realized the fields had changed. They weren't fields anymore. We were passing a wide plain of what looked like paper. Sheets of it, enormous ones, fluttered slightly in a wind I couldn't feel. Some had faint writing on them. Others bore sketches, flowers, animals, and one that clearly showed a map, though the places had names like Spindle Loop and Yesterday's Elbow. And just past that, I saw a tiny house floating in the air. Not flying, just resting there 2 feet above the paper fields, like it hadn't decided yet where to land. That's when the door beside me opened again, and someone sat down across from me. She wore a straw hat so wide it brushed against the curtain rod behind her, and in her lap was a small wooden box. She wasn't much older than me, 12 or 13, I guessed. Her dress was patched with different colors, like it had been sewn by someone who loved puzzles, and her shoes didn't match. She looked at me without blinking and said, "You've got a good face, not too symmetrical." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled and said thanks. "I mean it," she went on, adjusting the ribbon on her hat. "Symmetrical people always get eaten first. They're too easy to fold." That didn't help. She opened her box carefully as if the hinges were asleep. Inside there was a moth, no, several moths, big soft winged ones in pale colors, all curled quietly like they were napping. "Are those pets?" I asked. "Sort of," she said. "They're timekeepers. This one here," she held up the box so I could see more clearly, "counts backwards. That one counts hours that haven't happened yet." I nodded slowly, unsure if I should laugh. But the way she said it, she wasn't joking. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded square of paper, then handed it to me. "Here." I unfolded it. It was a drawing, not great, but you could tell what it was trying to be. It showed the train, the carriages stretching long and thin into the distance, but there was no engine. Instead, the front of the train ended in a curl, like a scroll halfway rolled up. "I tried to draw where we're going," she said. "Where are we going?" I asked. She shrugged. "Somewhere before or after, or just beside. It's different for everyone." That didn't really help either. Just then the train lurched slightly, not a bump exactly, but a sense that gravity had changed its mind for a second. The lamps flickered and every passenger all at once turned and looked out their windows. Even the ones who were sleeping. Even the man without pages in his notebook. The girl lifted her box of moths and whispered something to them in a language I didn't recognize. I turned to look outside again. We were passing a long field of clocks. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Grandfather clocks, wristwatches nailed to trees, pocket watches swinging from branches like fruit, sundials, water clocks, hourglasses, all ticking, all in perfect rhythm, but none of them showing the same time. Some were spinning backward. One enormous cuckoo clock emerged from a hill like a ship's prow, the bird caught in an endless loop of popping out and returning. And scattered among the clocks were scarecrows, only they weren't made of straw. They were made of glass. Tall, human-shaped figures reflecting the landscape, some with old hats, others wearing necklaces of rusted keys or curled ribbons. They didn't move, but I could have sworn one of them had my face. The girl smiled and said, "Don't wave. They remember gestures." I looked away quickly. The train kept moving smooth as ever. I noticed the ticket in my hand had changed. The stamped red mark was fading. The number on it had shifted slightly. Or maybe I'd just never noticed it before. The girl leaned back in her seat, resting her hand in the box. "We're nearly to the first loop," she said. "It gets stranger after that. Stranger than scarecrow mirrors and ticking fields." She nodded with a kind of sleepy certainty. "Oh yes, much stranger." Outside, the landscape began to blur, as though the train were moving through a painting still being finished. And up ahead, the sky turned the color of bruised peaches. We sat in silence for a while, the girl and I, watching the countryside tilt into something that wasn't quite countryside anymore. Outside the window, the world was being redrawn. The edges of things shimmered slightly like heat rising off asphalt. A hill appeared and then disappeared. A fence made of tuning forks stretched across a field of blue moss. And through it all, the train rolled forward without hurry, like it had nowhere particular to be, and all the time not to be there. Eventually, I turned back to the girl. "What's your name?" She blinked like the question had taken a moment to land. "Lena," she said, finally stroking one of the sleeping moths in her box. "But the conductor calls me that girl who talks too much. He thinks that's polite." I laughed. "I'm Eli." She didn't say anything right away. Instead, she opened a tiny hidden drawer in the side of the moth box and pulled out a peppermint candy, then offered it to me. It was a bit fuzzy around the edges, like it had been living at the bottom of a pocket for a few decades, but I took it anyway. Just then something shifted again outside the train, but I felt it in my stomach. We had passed into what looked like a long corridor of trees, except they weren't trees. At first I thought they were carved pillars, tall and spiraled like melted candles. But the longer I stared, the more I realized they were stacked paper cups. Huge ones towered one atop another, their rims fused into trunks. Some of them still had lipstick marks. Others bore tiny printed messages. Please refill with imagination. Do not drink the blue. We rolled past them without slowing. Then I noticed the other passengers again. A few had gotten up and moved toward the back of the carriage. One woman was pressing her ear to the wall. A boy in a knitted cap had removed his shoes and was drawing circles on the floor with a bit of chalk. The man writing in the blank notebook now had several pages filled, but only on the left-hand side. The right pages stayed blank. Lena looked at me with a kind of sideways grin. "You're doing well," she said. I raised an eyebrow. Doing what? Staying real. I laughed again, though I wasn't sure if she was joking. That's a thing people lose. She tilted her head. Only if they try to make sense of everything too soon. Fair enough. We fell quiet again, and I leaned my head against the window. The landscape had changed once more now, into something that looked like a vast sea of feathers. They moved as if breathing, rustling gently in waves. Tiny wooden houses floated between the plumes, anchored by strings that led up, not down. And then we entered a tunnel. At least I think we did. Everything outside went dark, but not like night. It was the kind of darkness that felt inside out. Like you'd closed your eyes and were seeing behind your own thoughts. The lights inside the carriage flickered again. For a moment I thought I saw my own reflection in the window wink at me. Then the train slowed. It didn't stop abruptly. It eased into stillness like a sigh, and a chime sounded 5 soft notes on a glockenspiel. Lena stood up and smoothed her dress. "We're here," she said. "Where?" I asked. "The market," she replied, as if that explained everything. I followed her off the train. There was a platform, but it was made of dark wood that curved gently like a whale's back. Steam coiled along the edges. There were no sign, no announcements, no waiting passengers. Just beyond the platform stretched a village square. Except it wasn't a square, it was a spiral. Stalls lined the path in tight looping curves, their roofs made of book pages and soft cloth. I saw baskets of silver feathers, boxes of bottled laughter, and a stall where a woman with 6 fingers played music using seashells and light. Everything was quiet. Not silent, but quiet, like everyone was whispering to the world instead of talking at it. As Lena and I walked into the spiral, she pointed out the man selling weather in jars. "That's Nimbus," she said. "Don't ask him for fog, he'll give you confusion." I smiled, taking it all in. The smells were incredible: spiced air, toasted memory, and something that reminded me of my grandmother's cedar chest. That's when I saw him. An old man with a long coat and a satchel full of apples. He was standing beneath a crooked sign that read, "Shadows for fruit, no refunds." He looked right at me. "You there?" he said in a voice like someone reading bedtime stories from a cave. "Want an apple?" I looked at Lena, who only shrugged. I stepped forward. "I don't have money," I said. "Good," he said, and pulled out a round apple, the color of dusk. "No one pays here with coins." I reached out, but he held it back. "Just your shadow," he said. I blinked. "What?" "Small one," he clarified, tapping the edge of the satchel. "The one you don't use much. Just a whisper of it. Not your walking shadow. A memory shadow. One you don't need anymore." I didn't know what to say. My heart thumped strangely. "What happens if I give it to you?" I asked. "You forget a little," he said, not unkindly. "Just a flicker. One hallway of thought you'll never walk down again." I hesitated. Lena stepped up and touched my arm. "He gave me a plum once," she said. Tasted like the first time I saw snow, but I haven't been able to remember my mother's lullaby since. The man just smiled as though that had been a glowing review. I stepped back. No thanks, I said. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, and with a wave of his hand, the apple dissolved into a puff of golden smoke. We walked on deeper into the spiral. Behind me, I could swear my shadow waved. We walked until the market spiral unwound into a gentle clearing made of worn carpet and potted trees that seemed to hum softly when the wind passed through them. A faded sign hung above the archway we passed through Mid-Loop Lounge. No entry without a story. No one stopped us. Maybe the story was already in our pockets. We came to a quiet place, one of those spaces that felt more like a pause in the world than a place. The air shimmered slightly, and the sound of the train, though distant, now still tickled the edges of my hearing like a song I'd forgotten. Lena took out one of her moths. This one had silvery wings with blue spots, and let it crawl gently onto her sleeve. "This one's curious," she said. "She listens for what people almost say." I watched the moth. It moved slowly, like it didn't want to disturb the moment. We sat down on a low bench made of driftwood and ribbons, and that's when I realized everyone around us had changed. The crowd was mostly older now. Not elderly, but aged in a different way, as if they'd collected more calendars than birthdays. Some wore jackets made of stamps. One woman wore a necklace of tiny shoes, all baby-sized. Another man had a suitcase that giggled whenever he opened it. But the strangest figure was sitting 2 benches away. A girl about my age with a moth-like scarf wrapped around her head. She had a long braid and was feeding crumbs to a mouse made entirely of buttons. When she noticed me watching, she gave me a small nod, then returned to her mouse. Lena leaned close. "She's been here for ages, never speaks. They say she rode the train in reverse." "How?" I asked. "No one knows. Maybe she folded her ticket wrong." I swallowed a question, not sure I wanted to know the answer. A soft chime rang from somewhere up above, and people started moving again. Some returned to the stalls. Others climbed a spiral staircase that wasn't there a moment before. A pair of women floated upward, holding strings attached to nothing. "Time to go," Lena said. We made our way back to the platform, which now had a different shape. It was slightly longer, with new lampposts and a small statue of an owl reading a map. The train was waiting. It looked the same, though I could have sworn it was breathing very gently, like an animal asleep. The carriages swayed ever so slightly, like they were dreaming. The conductor stood by the door checking watches that dangled from his coat like medals. When we passed, he looked at my ticket again. His eyes lingered on the fading ink. "You're doing fine," he said in a voice like wind through attic rafters. "Just don't skip the mirror." "The what?" But he was already turning away. We boarded again, and this time we weren't alone in our carriage. Several people from the market had followed us. A woman with feathers in her hair, a pair of twins who never blinked, and a man carrying a musical instrument that looked like a chair made of harp strings. They settled into their seats with gentle movements and long sighs, like they'd done this 100 times before. The train gave a soft lurch and we began to move again. Lena sat opposite me, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the moths back in their box. The window view showed a new landscape now, one that looked familiar, but not quite. Rolling hills stretched beneath a twilight sky. A fence I remembered from my childhood passed by, but it was twice as long and looped in impossible directions. "Are we heading back?" I asked. She looked at me with a strange little smile. "Kind of." I was about to ask what she meant when the door to the next car opened, and the conductor appeared again, this time holding something different. A small mirror. He passed down the aisle, holding it out to each passenger. Some looked into it. Some didn't. The woman with feathers in her hair gasped and turned away. One of the twins laughed. The other frowned. When he reached me, he didn't say anything. He just held it up. I looked. What I saw wasn't my face. It was a room, a very specific room. My bedroom. The version of it from when I was 8, the old bunk bed with the squeaky ladder, the stickers I used to keep on the closet door, the baseball glove I never used much. The light was soft and golden, and the curtains were waving slightly, like someone had just opened the window. I could hear the rustle of leaves, and sitting in the middle of the bed was me, but younger. I looked up at myself in the mirror and smiled. The reflection me tilted his head as though hearing a distant song. Then he turned his face toward the window and vanished. The conductor lowered the mirror. My hands were shaking just a little. He nodded once and continued down the aisle, his coat fluttering quietly behind him. Lena was watching me. That was your anchor, she said. My what? The place you leave from, she explained softly. Some people don't find it again once they've been on the train. I wanted to ask more, but my mouth was dry, so I just nodded and looked out the window. We were passing a familiar bend now, one I'd seen before, but never from this side. A row of trees I used to climb, a crooked mailbox with faded stickers, someone's bicycle lying in the grass. The train was heading into a memory, and I was still holding the ticket. The ticket in my hand had changed again. It was warmer now, softened like paper that had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The numbers printed on it had drifted slightly, like they were unsure where to land. I turned it over and noticed a faint crease that hadn't been there before. It looked exactly like a fingerprint, but not mine. Outside the window, the familiar bend in the road melted away. In its place appeared something so quietly strange that I nearly missed it at first. A field stretched out before us, but instead of grass or wheat or any normal crop, it was filled with clocks. They weren't planted exactly. Some had sunk into the earth as if they'd been growing there for years. Others hovered inches above the soil, ticking in slow loops, turning lazily like wind chimes. And the variety, they were all kinds: wristwatches strung like laundry grandfather clocks, swaying gently in invisible breezes, alarm clocks gently bobbing on top of mushroom caps. Sundials spun on their own. Hourglasses dripped sand upward. No two clocks agreed on the time. I pressed my face to the window, quietly stunned. People think time only goes forward, Lena said beside me. She hadn't spoken in a while, and her voice felt like a forgotten melody suddenly picked up again. But sometimes it grows sideways. That's what the conductor says. I asked softly, "Does he say where we're going?" She shook her head. No one really goes somewhere on this train. They arrive. That didn't clear things up, but at this point I was getting used to answers like that. And then I saw them, the scarecrows. At first, just one standing in the middle of the field of clocks. It shimmered like water, its body made entirely of glass. You could see straight through it almost. It had a face, sort of, but it wasn't carved. Just a vague shape formed from slivers and shards reflecting everything around it, like a dream trying to remember itself. More appeared as we moved, glass scarecrows scattered among the clocks. Some wore hats made from broken cups. One had an umbrella strapped to its back. Another had feathers where its arms should be spinning gently. And then I saw one with my face. Not a perfect reflection, but enough. My eyes. My old winter scarf wrapped around its neck. A chipped pin I'd lost years ago stuck into its shoulder like a badge. My breath caught. I didn't wave, I said mostly to myself. Good, Lena replied, not looking away from the window. They remember things too well. One of the scarecrows slowly lifted its arm as we passed. It didn't move like a machine or a person, more like a tree branch, swaying in a wind that only it could feel. I stared frozen until we were beyond it. A soft chime echoed through the carriage, 5 descending notes that felt like a lullaby remembered from underwater. The lights in the ceiling dimmed slightly, and the lamps beside each seat glowed warmer, deeper. The whole train seemed to exhale. And then the voice. It came through the overhead speaker, not a crackle, not an announcement, just a whisper, approaching the loop. Please remain seated in memory of yourself. Lena looked at me. This part's tricky. What loop? I asked. The one that turns, she replied. I was about to ask what she meant when the train slowed again gently enough that I barely noticed it. But everything around us changed. It wasn't like we entered a tunnel, more like the air folded itself neatly like origami, and the train moved through the crease. The sky, if it was still sky, dimmed into a sort of ink-stained velvet, and the landscape bent in impossible ways. Hills curled back into themselves. Trees bloomed backwards. A flock of birds flew by in reverse wings, beating slowly, crying out with voices that had no echo. The train itself creaked just once, as though remembering something heavy. I felt a pull in my chest. Not painful, just important. Like someone had gently tugged on the string of a balloon I hadn't known I was carrying. Then from the other side of the carriage a voice spoke. Well, isn't this lovely? Everyone turned. A man had entered from the rear of the car. He wore a long coat that shimmered with images that changed flowers, blooming waves, crashing clouds, chasing stars. His face was lined but kind, and his smile was unmistakably mischievous. The conductor. But different. His hat was gone. His shoes were mismatched. One hand held a clipboard covered in stamps and receipts. The other held a teacup full of marbles. He walked slowly through the aisle, glancing at each passenger. When he reached me, he stopped. You're doing very well, he said, as if I'd passed some kind of exam. But don't look too far ahead. I blinked. Why not? Because it's all behind you, he said, and kept walking. Lena giggled softly like she'd heard this joke before. I turned to her. Do you know what's next? She shrugged. Some people see something old. Some people see something new. And some people just see themselves. I waited. Then, with no warning, the window beside us filled with light. A soft, pale light like the moon caught in a teacup. It didn't blind, but it made everything else fade for a moment. And outside that glow, I saw my school, the old building, the red shutters, the cracked basketball court where I once twisted my ankle in third grade. It was winter and snow had just begun to fall. My friends were there, tiny versions of them, laughing, throwing snowballs. Someone had built a snowman that looked vaguely like our principal, and there I was, standing a little apart from the others, hands in my pockets, watching. I looked quieter than I remembered. Then the snow shimmered and turned to paper, flapping like 1,000 tiny wings, and the scene melted into mist. I leaned back, stunned. Lena had closed her eyes, smiling faintly. The train began to speed up again just a little. The conductor was gone, and the clocks in the fields behind us had all stopped. The train moved faster now, though the motion was smooth, almost like drifting down a slow river in a dream. I couldn't tell if we were returning somewhere or heading further in, but the windows no longer showed familiar places. Instead, there were scenes that looked like they belonged to someone else's memories. A carousel turning slowly in the rain. A giant library with no roof and books fluttering like birds. A beach with no waves, only gently shifting glass pebbles that tinkled softly in the breeze. Lena had dozed off, her hat tilted slightly over one eye. The moth box closed gently on her lap. I watched her for a moment, marveling at how someone could sleep in the middle of something so unexplainable. But then again, maybe that's exactly what made it possible. I turned my gaze back to the window. The world outside blurred into watercolor swirls as if the paint hadn't dried yet. The colors melted into one another, ochres, pale blues, soft lavender. It was beautiful in a strange, unfinished way. Then something shifted. The lights inside the carriage flickered again, and I heard a sound that hadn't been there before, a low hum, like distant singing, and the slow, hollow thunk of something being unlatched. The train slowed. Not a stop, just a pause. And then the door opened at the far end of the car. This time, no one entered. Instead, a scent wafted in. Sweet, almost too sweet. Like apples, but not quite. There was something metallic about it, too. sharp but not unpleasant. A man appeared in the doorway, holding a wicker basket filled to the brim with pale red fruit. His clothes were layered and worn as if each piece had a story. A long scarf trailed behind him, and his shoes were made of mismatched fabric that looked like curtain remnants. He stepped in, and his voice was rich and kind. Trade for a taste. No one moved at first. He smiled gently. Not coin, not things. I trade for shadows. That got a few heads to turn. He walked slowly down the aisle, offering the apples to each passenger. Most declined, though a few hesitated for a long moment before shaking their heads. When he reached me, he stopped. "You look like someone with a spare," he said, tilting the basket toward me. I looked at the apples. They were small and round skin, dappled like paint splatter, almost glowing from within. The scent was stronger now, filling the air around me. "Spare what?" I asked. "Shadow," he said, as if it were obvious. "Not your big one. Just a corner, a sliver. The part you only see when the sun's behind you and you're not looking." I glanced down. My shadow was faint in the golden carriage light, rippling gently beneath my seat. It looked the way it always had. "I don't think I have any to spare," I said honestly. He nodded, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small mirror cracked at the corner, held together by a loop of copper wire. "Take a look," he offered. I hesitated, then leaned forward. The mirror didn't show my reflection. It showed a memory. Me, maybe 7 years old, standing in my backyard at dusk, holding a firefly in a jar. The light flickered inside it, and I remember thinking I could keep it forever. Then the lid slipped, and the firefly escaped, leaving only the memory of its brief, flickering glow. The image faded. "That's a shadow," the man said. "Not the light, not the firefly, just the trace of what didn't stay." I looked at the apple again. It did look delicious. "What happens if I trade?" I asked. "You forget a corner of yourself," he said gently. "Not a bad thing, not always." I thought of the firefly, the way the jar had felt cold in my hand, the guilt, the wonder. I shook my head. "I'll keep that one." The man smiled as if he'd expected it. "Wise," he said, and moved on. Behind him, someone else whispered, "Yes." A soft gasp followed. When I turned, the woman with feathers in her hair had taken an apple and was now crying gently into her hands, a smile on her lips. The basket man disappeared through the back door, and just like that, the hum vanished. The carriage quieted again. The light softened. The train picked up speed. Lena stirred. "He offered you one?" she asked sleepily. I nodded. "You said no." "Yeah." She stretched a little and grinned. "Good. If you'd said yes, I would have had to tell you a long, slow story about a boy who forgot how to cry when it counted." "Has that happened before?" She nodded solemnly. "Twice." Outside the window, the world began to shift again. The watercolor dreamscape bled into sharper shapes as if focus was returning. I saw rooftops, familiar ones, a line of power poles, a winding river. The sky was still dream-colored, but the ground below looked a lot like home. The ticket in my hand pulsed gently just once. And then I noticed something impossible. In the curve of the river, my bike, rusty red frame, one pedal missing, leaning against a rock in the exact spot I'd left it years ago when I'd been chased by a dog and never went back for it. "I think we're looping back," I said. Lena nodded. "We always do, but never quite the same way." The conductor passed us again this time, carrying a bundle of empty teacups and a roll of thread. As he passed, he paused just long enough to say, "We'll be stopping soon. Pack up your certainty." Outside, the rooftops flickered like blinking eyes, and a tree I remembered from my walk to school reached up toward the sky, its branches shaped like question marks. We didn't slow down right away. Instead, the train drifted through a stretch of town that looked almost, but not quite, like the one I grew up in. The houses had all the right shapes: pitched roofs, narrow chimneys, windows framed with ivy. But there were small oddities too. One house had 3 front doors stacked on top of each other. Another had curtains that blinked. And someone had hung laundry across the power lines only instead of clothes. It was strings of colored paper folded into birds and boats and stars. "This is the in-between," Lena murmured. "It's the place that remembers where you're going before you do." Outside, a man rode a bicycle on the sidewalk, but the wheels didn't touch the ground. He floated slightly above it, pedaling in slow rhythmic circles, like a fish swimming in air. In a nearby yard, a girl skipped rope with her shadow. There were 2 ropes, and both ends were held by her alone. I felt something shift in my chest again. Not a pain exactly, just a tug, like a memory returning before I'd even finished remembering it. The train gave a soft chime, 3 notes rising gently. Lena sat up straighter and began adjusting the ribbons on her sleeves. "We're close," she said. "To what? What's first, Sibu? To your stop." I blinked. "But we've barely gone anywhere." She smiled. "Haven't we?" She opened her moth box, and one by one the creatures inside began to stir. They blinked, yes, blinked and fluttered softly, stretching their wings like cats after a long nap. One moth flew up and landed gently on my shoulder. It didn't weigh anything, but its presence felt warm. "Do they always leave with you?" I asked. "No," Lena said. "They go where they're needed. One of them thinks you've forgotten something important." I frowned. "Like what?" She only shrugged. "That's for you to find." We passed over a wooden bridge I recognized immediately. The planks had been replaced 3 summers ago after a flood carried half of them into the creek. I remembered walking across it barefoot with my cousin, daring each other to stay longer in the middle. And there it was, the station. Not Fennel Crossing where I'd started, but something older, smaller. A platform I hadn't seen since I was maybe 5 years old. My grandfather used to bring me here to watch the trains go by, even though they rarely stopped. The bench was still there, tilted slightly with initials carved into the wood E+J. I'd forgotten about that. The train slowed at last and the lamps inside dimmed again. The passengers around me didn't stir. They remained seated, gazing gently at nothing, like statues in the waiting room of a dream. The conductor appeared at my side. "Ready?" he asked. I hesitated. "What happens if I stay?" He tilted his head. "You keep going. Eventually you forget the way back, and then you start remembering other people's memories instead." That didn't sound terrible, but it didn't sound like me. I looked at Lena. She was quiet now, the moths fluttering gently around her. One of them looped over to me again, brushing my forehead. The air felt colder where it touched. I stood. The conductor stepped aside, and I made my way toward the door. At the edge of the platform, the door opened with a soft sigh. The air outside was warm and smelled like river mud and wildflowers, just like I remembered. I could hear a crow calling somewhere in the distance. A dog barked twice. My foot hovered at the door. Then Lena's voice. "Ellie." I turned. She was standing now, her hat back on moths, circling lazily above her shoulders. Her eyes were gentler than before, and her voice was softer. "Don't forget to let some things go quiet. They're supposed to." I nodded, even if I didn't fully understand. She smiled, then handed me something. A folded note sealed with a button. "Don't open it now," she said. "Open it when you forget what this all felt like." I tucked it into my jacket pocket. The conductor gave a little bow, and I stepped off. The platform felt solid, real. The train behind me exhaled once, like a sigh of approval. Then it rolled away, slow at first, then swifter, until it vanished behind the trees. The tracks were gone. I was alone. Well, not quite. A familiar figure stepped out from the edge of the woods. My grandfather. Not young, not old. Just the way I remembered him on quiet mornings, hands in his pockets, eyes warm with stories he never had time to tell. He didn't speak. He just nodded at the bench and sat. I followed and sat beside him. And for a while, we just listened to the wind through the leaves, to the faraway buzz of dragonflies, to the soft beat of our hearts, remembering the same old things. Then I reached into my pocket, found the note Lena had given me, and held it tight. I didn't open it. Not yet. The station faded behind me, not all at once like a curtain dropping, but in pieces like fog unraveling. One moment I was sitting beside my grandfather, and the next I was walking down a dirt path lined with sunflowers far taller than I remembered. The trail twisted gently through trees I hadn't seen in years. Somewhere in the branches above, birds chirped in pairs, trading songs that sounded like lullabies from other people's dreams. I didn't remember deciding to walk. I just was one foot in front of the other, dust kicking up behind me in soft little clouds. The sun wasn't hot, just warm enough to remind me it was still there. My shadow walked beside me, the same size as always, though I could have sworn it waved once. That same note, the one Lena gave me, was still in my pocket. It crinkled every time I moved, a reminder that I hadn't yet forgotten enough to need it. I wasn't ready to open it. Not yet. The path led me to a river. Not a wide one, more like a stream, but it moved with the kind of slowness that made you think it wasn't in a rush to be anything other than water. There was a wooden boat tied to a post. It bobbed quietly, its oars resting on either side like wings folded in sleep. I climbed in. The boat drifted without effort, gliding past reeds that whispered against the hull. Tiny frogs leapt into the water with little plips, and dragonflies hovered in figure eights. I trailed my hand in the river. It felt like melted glass, cool, smooth, with no pull. Just presence. Up ahead, I saw something strange. Letters, large ones made of wood, stood half submerged along the shore. They spelled out a word I didn't recognize. Maybe it was a name, or maybe it was a sound that had never been spoken out loud. Each letter had moss growing over it and birds perched like punctuation. I wanted to ask someone what it meant, but I was alone again, and yet I wasn't afraid. The boat drifted past a tree that had wind chimes hanging from its roots, which twisted up into the sky instead of down. Each chime rang with a different memory, not mine necessarily, but familiar just the same. A dog barking through a screen door, the crack of a baseball bat, the bubbling sound of something frying in a distant kitchen. And then I heard my name, Eliwantiyadum. It was quiet, almost apologetic. A child's voice, soft like the start of a question that never got asked. I turned, but no one was there. Just the bend of the river and a pair of empty shoes sitting neatly on the shore. The boat kept going. Eventually, the stream split in two. One side flowed into a tunnel made of stone and ivy, dark and coiled like a forgotten hallway. The other widened into a pond shaped like a teacup, where water lilies glowed faintly and frogs wore tiny ribbons. I didn't choose either. The boat chose for me. It turned toward the pond, slower now, and came to rest beside a dock made of book spines. I stepped out onto it, half expecting the titles to whisper as I walked. Athatin. They didn't, but I knew somehow that each spine held a story I hadn't lived. On the shore stood a small pavilion. Inside was a table, and at that table sat me, or rather someone who looked exactly like me, only older by years, or maybe just understanding. He wore my old jacket from middle school and held a pencil in his hand, though there was no paper in front of him, just a smooth wooden tabletop. He looked up and smiled. Finally, I sat across from him. We didn't speak at first. He poured us both a cup of tea from a pot shaped like a starfish. The liquid inside shimmered pink, then gold, then pale green. I drank, and it tasted like the first day of spring. "Why am I here?" I asked. He took a long sip and said, "To remember the thing you didn't mean to forget." "What thing, happening?" But he just tapped the table, and a ripple spread out from his fingertip. In the ripple, I saw a small red box, the one I used to keep under my bed. I hadn't thought about it in years. Inside it had been my collection of the most random objects: a piece of blue string, a flat marble from a sidewalk, a coin from a country I'd never visited, and a note from my mom. Just 5 words: "You always knew the way." I swallowed. "I lost it," I said quietly. He shook his head. "You left it behind. That's different." He stood. The wind picked up gently, stirring the trees around us, making the water in the teacup pond ripple like a sigh. "It's time to go." I looked around. "Go where?" He smiled again, not answering. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper crane. As he held it out to me, it slowly began to unfold page by page, crease by crease, until it was just a square sheet of paper with the word "continue" written in the center. Then he vanished. The pavilion faded with him, and I stood once more at the edge of the water holding the paper. Behind me, I heard the train's whistle. It didn't sound like a horn this time. It sounded like my name being remembered. The paper in my hand fluttered like a bird ready to take off. I stared at the word in its center, "continue," as if it might start moving, might rearrange itself into a more specific instruction. But it didn't. It just sat there waiting for me to catch up to what it already knew. Behind me, the train's whistle called again. Not loud or shrill, just enough to stir something inside my chest. A long, curling tone that echoed in a way only dreams and old memories do. I turned. There was no station this time. Just a path, a narrow one made of mismatched floor tiles, like someone had taken a handful from different kitchens and pieced them together through the woods. Some were cracked, some dusty, some still warm, as if they'd just been walked across. I followed them. The trees around me whispered gently, not words but almost. Their branches bent to make way, their leaves shimmering gold and green, casting patterns that looked suspiciously like faces. I thought I saw my childhood dog watching from behind a thicket of bushes, tail wagging, then gone. Then I stepped onto a tile that was mine. I recognized it. The peach-colored one with a chip in the corner, from our old laundry room, where I used to lie on the floor and listen to the dryer thump, pretending it was the heartbeat of a sleeping house. I knelt down and touched it. It was warm. The wind picked up a little, rustling the leaves above, and from behind a tree the train appeared. Not charging in, not dramatic, just rolling gently, like it had been waiting for me just around the bend. Only this time it was different. Smaller, cozier. Its cars were shorter, the windows rounded like teacups, and light spilled from within in soft amber tones. The metal glowed faintly, like it had absorbed too many sunsets. The door opened without a sound. I stepped in. Lena was already there, but not quite the same. Her hat was gone. Her hair was loose, curled over her shoulders like stories not yet told. Her moth box rested in her lap, but it was open now and empty. "They've all gone home," she said. "To where way, Surnum, to the stories they came from." The train started to move, but this time I didn't feel it in my feet. I felt it behind my eyes, a kind of gentle pulling, like being reeled back towards something I'd left hanging in the air. Outside, the landscape was shifting again, but now instead of becoming stranger, it was simplifying. Hedges, lawns, a row of hedges shaped like animals, a cul-de-sac where the pavement glittered faintly in the streetlight. We passed a playground, the one I used to go to after school. The swings were still crooked, the slides still creaked. I could see 2 children playing beneath the monkey bars. One had my laugh. I watched quietly. Lena smiled without looking at me. "It's folding back now." "What is the kmaniu?" "The space between before and after." She leaned her head on the window and hummed something tuneless, but comforting. I looked down at my lap. The note she had given me, sealed with a button, was still there. I unfolded it. Inside was a drawing. Not words, just a tiny sketch of a boy sitting on a hill under a night sky, stars shaped like paper clips and old coins. His arms were wrapped around his knees. He wasn't sad, just waiting. And under it, a single line in her handwriting: "You remembered, that's enough." I felt something lift. Not leave, just loosen like a knot that didn't need to stay tied anymore. The lights inside the train dimmed one by one. Outside the window, my old house came into view. Not the current version, but the one from before it was repainted, before the shutters fell off, before the porch swing stopped swinging. I could see someone through the window, sitting at the kitchen table, doodling in a spiral notebook. Me. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a fantasy. It was just a moment still happening somewhere. The train slowed one final time. The conductor, yes, the same conductor from the beginning, appeared in the aisle. He held no clipboard now, just a small folded paper star. "For the journey," he said, handing it to me. "It'll glow if you ever need to find the way back." Back to where? He didn't answer. Lena stood too. Her shoes were gone. Barefoot, she stepped softly to the door. "This is where I get off," she said. "You're not coming with me." She shook her head. "You're almost home now. Besides, the next passenger will need this seat." I wanted to say something more. Thank you, goodbye, something meaningful. But the door opened and she stepped out into mist that shimmered like morning. I sat alone now. The carriage was empty and the walls pulsed softly, like they were breathing in the same rhythm I was. Outside, the landscape folded once more, this time into something I couldn't describe. It wasn't scenery. It was possibility. And the train didn't stop. Not yet. Not quite. But I could feel it slowing again. Somewhere ahead, a room with a warm bed, a light left on a quiet clock ticking gently. Somewhere ahead, the part where this story ends and a new dream begins. The final stretch of the journey felt less like movement and more like remembering how to be still. The train made almost no sound now, just a soft hum that matched the rhythm of my breathing. Outside the window, the world had gone translucent. Not blank or white, just gentle. Hazy outlines of rooftops, hills, old telephone poles, all fading into a soft watercolor wash of blues and creams. I sat in the quiet and held the folded paper star the conductor had given me. It didn't glow, at least not in any ordinary way, but it felt warm in my palm, like it had a heartbeat. I tucked it into my jacket pocket next to Lena's note. The train began to curve and I saw the station ahead. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It looked like a page from one of my old storybooks, a weathered wooden platform with ivy crawling up the railing, a chipped bench, and a crooked lamppost casting light like spilled honey. But more than anything, it looked familiar. The doors opened before the train had even stopped. I stepped off my shoes, making the smallest sound on the wood. The air smelled like summer evenings and fresh laundry. Crickets sang somewhere nearby. I half expected to hear the ice cream trucks jingle drifting from a distant street corner. A narrow gravel path led away from the station, curving gently into a grove of trees. I followed it, heart quiet, legs moving, as if they'd made this walk before. Then just past a bend in the trees, my house. Not a replica, not a dream version. My house. The one I left. The one I'd nearly forgotten how to return to. Its porch light was on. And sitting on the porch, knees pulled up, hoodie, half-zip socks mismatched, was me. Younger again. Maybe 10, maybe 11. Hair messy, cheeks flushed. A small flashlight flickered beside him. A notebook lay open on his lap, half a drawing, half a map. He looked up when I approached. "I wondered when you'd find your way back," he said. His voice was mine, but rounder, lighter. "I thought I'd lost the road," I said softly. He shook his head. "It was never lost, just waiting." I sat down beside him on the porch steps. The old wood groaned the way it always did, and something inside me settled like two halves meeting again after a long drift. He offered me a piece of candy from his pocket. It was slightly melted, wrapped in gold foil. I took it. "You still like these?" "Of course. Some things don't change, they just hide." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. The stars overhead blinked in and out like thoughts forming slowly, and the night wrapped itself around us like a warm blanket. The porch light buzzed softly. A breeze came through, brushing against the trees, carrying with it the faint sound of something distant. A train whistle, perhaps. I smiled, closed my eyes. And in that moment I felt it. The end of the loop. The gentle return. The quietness that isn't absence, but presence too full to speak. And as the moss of memory curled into rest, as the boy beside me leaned his head on my shoulder, as the world tucked itself in, I breathed out one last time, slowly, deeply, like a story finished, like a light dimming, like a dream settling into sleep. So now we're here, back where we started, or maybe further along the same soft circle. The train has moved on, the moths are dreaming, and the stars are blinking gently above a world that doesn't need to be explained, only held. It's quiet now, isn't it? Let that quiet wrap around you like a favorite blanket, one that still smells like cedar wood and rain. You're allowed to drift. You're allowed to forget the clocks, the maps, the reasons. For now, there's nothing to solve. No next station. Just the breath in your chest and the steady pulse of your heartbeat syncing with a train that travels between thoughts. If you listen carefully, you might still hear it. The slow rhythm of tracks humming below dreams. The whisper of a moth's wings brushing through memory. The quiet sound of yourself remembering how to rest. Let your thoughts go soft. Let them tumble like leaves. You're not lost. You're not late. You're exactly where you need to be. And everything you've carried, every note, every button, every half-forgotten melody, it's safe now. So close your eyes. Let the porch light flicker one last time. Let the story curl into its final sentence. And let sleep take your hand like an old friend. End of script. Sweet dreams.